Well, good. So first, before we get started, we'll start with Sam, and we'll make some introductions first, and then we'll dive into kind of a discussion around some of the things that we're seeing and some topics that I've kind of outlined, and then we want to open it up for Q&A and get your feedback and input and have a lively discussion. And Phil will be ready with Mike. Sam?
Good evening, everyone. It's very good to be here speaking with all of you. I am an industry analyst at IHS Markit. I cover the Internet of Things. I've been an industry analyst since 2001 and have covered machine-to-machine and now IoT since 2005. So again, very happy to be here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nadine Manjaro. I'm an IoT consultant for my own company, Beyond Machine-to-Machine Communications. I've been in IoT about 8 years. Prior to that, I worked for many of the carriers, Sprint, Verizon, in telecom infrastructure, wireless infrastructure, and wireline infrastructure for close to 20 years.
Good evening. My name is Bill Pugh. I'm managing partner for Smart Connections Consulting. We work with about 30-plus cities as well as companies in terms of connecting things for smart city solutions, whether it be smart grid, smart energy, smart whatever it is. And I'm really thrilled to be here talking to you all.
Hi, I'm Daniel Obodovski. I'm CEO of Silent Intelligence, which is an advisory group in IoT data monetization, primarily focused in supply chain logistics, transportation logistics, and smart cities. And I'm also running an organization called Scale San Diego, which stands for Smart Cities, Accelerator, Labs, and Environment.
And I guess since you guys already know me, I'm not going to go into my bio or anything. But from a smart cities perspective, Compass Intelligence covers the market from a market research perspective, forecasting, modeling. We've done some projects for tech vendors looking at the Smart Cities Benefit Index. We did some things around that, and we've done some other things diving into kind of where the value is and some of the core use cases. And from my perspective, from a smart cities perspective, it's really more around use cases and what the end users are experiencing in the cities. So let's dive into a couple of things. So first and foremost, I think all of us have different perspectives. Some of us on the stage are working with the tech companies. Some of us are working with the systems integrators and some of the big guys, some of the smaller players. Some of us are also working with cities, which is great to have on stage. So before we jump into some of the questions that I have prepared, I want us to kind of give an overview of how we define smart cities. And we'll start with Sam.
Sure. So smart cities, in our view, is essentially the use of ICT to improve city operations efficiency, improve the lives of citizens.
Well, I would concur with what Sam is saying. Smart cities is around using technology, Internet of Things technology to improve the lives, maybe improve last mile transportation, make connectivity available so that they can take advantage of some of the services, and just improve communication overall.
So I struggle with it a bit, primarily because I've never heard one city consider themselves a dumb city. So I kind of look at it as, inside out. A number of the cities actually taking their vertically integrated organizations, leveraging that data that's already there and providing new insights to its citizens while they're working on the outside or the OT side of the world and improving the experience of the citizens.
I did my first smart city project in 2009 with MIT Sensible City Lab. And since then, and seen a lot of different smart cities projects and been thinking about smart city is a vision, right? To me, smart city is, we're trying to get there, we're not quite there. But ultimately, once we get there, it's going to be a city run like an operating system, where you have different functions in different departments of the city sharing multiple infrastructures, but all the infrastructures that are talking to each other. And the benefit of that is being able to very flexibly predict things and change things, whether it's transportation, whether it's extreme climate events, being able to forecast them and adjust and change things in the city, underserved neighborhoods, affordable housing, and many, many, many other things in the city. And to get there, it's ultimately utilization of data, large volumes of data that we're having in the city. So that's my view.
That's good. I would add to that, I think that we've all talked about, improving the citizens' experiences, improving services. I think it's really about leveraging technology, automation, application, software, cloud, all of these things coming together. But at the end, we are really focusing on improving city services, improving the community and residents and constituents' experiences with the city as they interact through work, live, and play, life and play. That's essentially bringing it all together. So let's talk a little bit about funding. I think some of you guys are involved, some of you guys that are more involved with projects that around use cases, and some are more involved on the technology or on the tech side of it. So let's talk, I want to pose this question to both Bill and Daniel, and if you guys have something to add, let me know. What are you guys experiencing or seeing from a funding perspective with the customers that you're speaking with? I know we got some feedback today, or earlier today, in terms of the creativity, but what are you guys seeing that from your own customer projects and how they're actually making this work today?
Well, for me, the first thing that I saw in talking with a number of the cities was first and foremost an explanation. I mean, smart cities, I get asked the question, why is it taking so long to adopt? Why is it taking so long to get a full rollout of any given application or solution? And I look back at 2008, smart grid was just starting to pick up. And I remind them that that was federally funded. You had stimulus dollars that was creating that market and that opportunity for the independently owned utility, investor-owned utilities, municipalities. All of these utilities were able to vie for some funding to actually implement their smart grid solutions. We don't have that for smart cities. So you have institutes that are providing private-public partnerships. You have other ways of getting the funding, but there's spot. So it's a challenge, and that's why, I think we see so much in terms of pilots that are started and never, fully executed. I think Cisco made a statement that 67% of all pilots kind of just die out, and I do believe that it's governed by the fact that there's no federal funded dollars associated with it. But NIST, US Ignite, a number of these other organizations are really rallying around to try to provide funding for cities that are actually wanting to roll out full deployments.
Now that's good feedback. I do hear other areas around Department of Justice, Department of Agriculture, where they're actually funding some projects specific to farming and bringing the farm to table, right? Bringing fresh food to the city and doing some things around that. What do you have? What's your perspective, Daniel?
Well, so I think the municipal dollars and even the federal dollars, while they're very, very critical, over time, they're probably going to constitute the minority share of funding of smart city projects. Let me elaborate. So we'll see kind of maybe three major sources coming to funding smart city projects. Earlier today, we heard the presentation by Ricky from Sprint about the 5G technologies and 5G technologies of deployment. So this is one of the major forces that in the upcoming years is going to drive a lot of smart city deployment. Let me just explain. So basically, wireless carriers, wireless telecom companies need to deploy 5G infrastructure. And deploying a 5G infrastructure is not only the femtocells, not only the high urban density cells, but also the whole infrastructure, which includes fiber optical cable. And this time around, many carriers opting for putting their own fiber optical cable versus leasing it from somebody else. So there are multi-billion-dollar investments going in the city and the infrastructure. Now, as these companies are trying to get city permits and to deploy this infrastructure, the dialogue that they're having with the city is said, okay, well, infrastructure sounds great, but what are we actually going to get out of this? What kind of solutions can you bring? And that forces the vendors to think really, really hard about what kind of smart city solutions they can bring on top of their infrastructure. Very similarly, it's playing out also with the wireline, with the traditional cable providers like Cox and Charter and Comcast, who are also investing billions of dollars into laying their own fiber optical cable in cities. And as a matter of fact, US Ignite, that Bill just mentioned, is largely funded by companies like Cox and others to deploy smart city solutions. And finally, the third force that's driving funding for smart city are the utilities. Utilities are facing a lot of challenges, and it's probably a topic for separate discussions. I'm not going into that. But they still have a lot of cash, right? And they're all thinking very, very hard how they can differentiate their business models in the cities. They're starting with EV charging infrastructure, but they're going beyond that. They're evaluating very different services that they can launch with the cities. And they're going to be funding those because for them, it's a way to differentiate away from the traditional pure grid management services to the new types of services. So we're going to see a lot of these things play out in the next probably 5+ years.
Nadine, and you had something?
Add, I know that I was at a conference yesterday, and there were several of the carriers there, and they were saying that they were bringing in third-party companies to fund some of these initiatives, and then they're doing revenue share through those third-party companies. So it was Smart City, another company called Smart City Funding that was backed, I think, by Cisco, and they're going in with this. Operators are taking the lead, and they're bringing these third-party companies who will actually help fund and manage the projects.
So IHS ran a survey in conjunction with the US Conference of Mayors earlier this year. We had about 51 cities respond with respect to their programs. And an interesting finding from that with respect to the funding models is that small cities, less than 150,000 residents, and medium-sized cities, 150 to 1 million residents, if you look at the funding model's very broad bucket, about 80% public funding, 10% private, 10% public-private partnerships. Not quite that finely delineated, a little bit of movement between small and medium. But the interesting part comes in when you look at large cities where 1 million residents or above, where slightly less than half were funding via public funding. 15% were funding via private, and about 35% were funding via public-private partnerships. So I think the interpretation that we took away from that is that larger cities, one interpretation is larger cities have done more work to explore how to pull in different types of funding models. And I think public-private partnerships are going to be so critical, particularly here in the US, because as Bill outlined, we don't have the same type of central government resources or supra-government resources that is available in Europe or China. So in Europe, they have Horizon 2020. I think it's some $32 billion that is being dispersed out to member countries. There's some 300 smart cities in China. They get strong central government backing for that. And so absent that, public-private partnerships and frankly, private initiatives like Cisco's $1 billion fund, I think, are going to be particularly critical here in the States.
So I have a couple of questions that we compiled, and we're hearing a lot about the deployment of smart city solutions and the power of data collected and insights provided. What are some of the challenges inside the city operations that are impacting progress in this space, right? What's happening inside?
Where do we start?
Okay, so the very first thing, I work with the city of Palo Alto as one of my clients. Department of Sustainability has an initiative to reduce greenhouse gas, CO2 emissions, and things of that nature. And that initiative has its own track, its own technology, discovery, and everything of that nature. Traffic Department has its own set of initiatives driven around Vision Zero. I put the two together and asked them, if you reduce the congestion, will you not reduce the CO2 emissions? They said, yeah. Well, why don't you guys share information so that you can establish a baseline inside the city first? Well, that's not what we normally do. So inside the city, I look at things from the inside out, and I start talking to the cities, and they're like, well, that's just not something that we do. We don't deal with things in that fashion. They have their data, and I said, but your initiatives are impacted by another group. So how do you ever achieve metrics to success if you're being impacted by another group? I just think that we hear so much talk about the OT side of the world. How do we improve traffic and how do we improve parking, which, by the way, in Palo Alto, you're not going to improve parking by ticketing people because they overstayed, because the citizens pay for that through taxes, so you're not getting it that way. This is that convoluted conversation about making it better for the citizens or those that visit the city versus beneficial for the city. And you've kind of got to draw those ties. So I see where cities have to work on the inside themselves and then turn those informations outward and say which applications, which solutions are going to be most beneficial for our efficiency as well as the benefit of the citizens there.
And I'm wondering too if this is a much larger conversation where maybe there's some action and some initiatives that are pushed towards the mayors and some of the folks that are managing at the top, that hey, you need to have a visual look at what's happening across different groups and start to identify where do we have overlap, what are some of the goals, and from a planning perspective where we can have some synergies, right? I don't know, is there advice that you guys might have in terms of how folks in the city really need to better plan or have better communications around that?
I think cities need a lot of help more than anything. And it's not just something that you can institute. Let me kind of give you a perspective on this, right? Cities are drowning in data, absolutely drowning, right? And just to put things in perspective, right? So there's a lot of data that's being digitized, like financial reports, blueprints, schedules, permits, and so on and so on and so on. On top of that, the new data or big data from IoT sensors is coming at them like so fast you cannot even imagine, right? We're based on some forecasts, we're at about close to 20% CAGR of data, like big data growth. And by 2025, we're supposed to be at 36% CAGR of big data growth. 36% CAGR, it's doubling every 2 years, right? So there's all this data coming at them, right? And I think I should just hold it. So basically, all this data is coming at them. And a company like Google has something like 1,000 data scientists. 1,000 data scientists. A city has 3, if they're lucky.
Yes.
And even if they're going to go and hire a data scientist in every single department, just think about the sheer volumes, right? So you have 1,000 data scientists in Google, and you have 5, maybe 10, maybe 12 in a city. So that's where it really hurts, because you need to kind of close the gap between technology and reality, right? And the reality is there are floods, there are wildfires, there's crazy traffic, there's parking shortage, there's not enough housing, there's homelessness. This is reality in the cities. And you cannot just go to the city and say, hey, we have this super cool sensor platform. It's just, going to generate a lot of data, because the reaction to that would be, okay, thank you very much. I already have a ton of data, I have no idea what to do with, and you're going to multiply it by 1,000 times. Again, thank you very much. So that's where cities need a lot of help.
No, I've had some conversations with customers, and one of the, I guess, advice that we've gotten so far is that why, as cities, why are we not working with our public colleges and universities more, especially around the data science and data engineering departments, right, where we might be able to really leverage some of the new talent that's coming from our colleges and universities. Why are we not working with the younger generation of engineers that are coming out of that and doing more to collaborate some things before, right, early on, because we have got to start growing our talent within, and we want to also retain that talent with our cities. So if we're already understaffed, if we're already understaffed now or under-resourced, do we hire outside, right? Do we pull in people, or do we really try to cultivate that within the city, right? And so there's a lot of conversations going on around that. Secondly, the curriculum at some of the colleges and universities aren't there yet. I know, talking to Texas A&M University on the advisory board there, that's the discussion I'm going to have next week there, is how do we improve our engineering curriculum to better address what's happening 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, because even the curriculum within colleges is not keeping up with the pace of technology and what's happening in the cities. So they are thinking strategically about that from a planning perspective, and there is a gap in the market right now. Mm-hmm. We do not have enough data scientists or engineers that also have the application knowledge base. We don't just need technologists. We need solutions architects, and that's the gap in the industry.
Yeah,
that's the gap.
I think it's the same thing like Bill said too. You have different organizations within the city, and they have their own budgets, and so they're doing their own IoT solutions, and it's not aggregated at some central level. I mean, they're probably moving towards that, but that's what I've seen in some of the cities that I've spoken with. So you have this one building, like you said, maybe a smart parking solution, this one building something else, but they're not combined because of how they do the budgets. And then I think too, when you change in leadership, then there's a change in the direction as well. So that's something that has to be addressed. But to Stephanie's point, there's definitely a lack of people with the skills, the data scientists. There's a shortage of them. And then the companies like Google's and Microsoft and so forth, they're going to be able to attract that talent away. So we definitely have to change that from the education level. And maybe it's not the 4-year universities, because they take too long. And by that time, we're already behind, right? This data is already coming at us. So I think they have to come up with some creative way of educating a core group of people. I mean, China is on a big race to try to be #1 in data analytics, right? And so everybody's seeing that there's a problem, but they're not addressing it at a national level or at the city level. What do we do? How do we educate more people in this field? And then how do you then retain them against competitors like a Google or Amazon who could pay them a lot more? So yeah.
Good feedback. Did you have anything to add, Sam? I'll jump into another question if you...
No, I mean, really just echoing what Nadine and Bill said. That is what we're certainly hearing with respect to smart cities. Regarding your point and Daniel's point about the complexity and the lack of internal expertise, we hear that across IoT, actually. I mean, smart cities, but a range of different verticals and applications.
That's a good feedback. So I want to jump into kind of change direction. So from a city perspective, we've all seen the list. We've all heard a lot of the marketing and the things that have been pushed out about who's the smartest city, and it's usually, for one project or something small scale. What do you guys believe, out of all the cities right now, even global, think globally, what are some of the cities that you believe are really doing it and doing it well, or much more ahead of the game? Do you have any examples for us to kind of look at? Because we, as sitting in the audience, want to learn from our peers and also try to replicate some of the successes that are happening in other cities.
I mean, North America-wise, it's the challenge. I mean, because you'll hear a number of cities that are doing X, Y, and Z, but nothing really ties together. They're very much spot solutions. Singapore, in my opinion, is by far the most advanced.
Yes.
The reason? They don't have the politics. Singapore government says this is good for you. They do it. I mean, they just put out, recently, last year, they put out an RFP. They were going to have 150,000 cameras. You have no privacy? What are you talking about? You live here. These cameras will help protect you. Audio sensing, I mean, you name it. All of the stuff that we've heard about in terms of where all of this is going, Singapore has had no problem. I've spoken with them several times, and it amazes me that, okay, their smart poles are really smart poles. There's digital signage, there's cameras, there's audio detection, it interacts with your phone. I'm like, this is amazing. But Singapore by far.
So a good model for U.S. cities to maybe look at, and maybe a model for applications and what's successful, but not necessarily the political structure is so different here. So we can admire them all we want, but if we don't have the funding and the infrastructure and the backing from all levels, what are we going to do? Right?
Well, I mean, I think to that point, I mean, we struggle, both internal of the city, as well as now you have the city council that doesn't believe that it's good for the people, so we're going to vote against it. You're not doing that. Again, in Palo Alto, I like Palo Alto because they're a small city, 65,000 people. And I thought, well, 65,000 people, we can get things done fast. Spent my first year with them developing the vision. And I'm hands-on. I want to get out there and do things. 65,000 people, it took us a year to complete the vision. Now, to your point, you mentioned working with colleges. Carnegie Mellon is there, Stanford is there, Sonoma State. All of them are like, well, we can develop solutions. We can develop solutions. I felt like Oprah, you get one, and you get one, and you get one. But then they struggle when it comes to scale. So very easy for academia to pool their resources and get out there and deliver it. But again, we're at the point of proof of concept, pilot, where's the scale, where's the benefits realized by the cities.
So great at ideation, but need a lot more support from an execution perspective. And we have been talking about this offline, is that we also feel like there's kind of a gap in the market ecosystem. Big carriers and the OEMs and some of the integrators, some of the IBMs of the world, the Googles of the world, they all have their own partnership ecosystems. And when it comes to smart cities, it's like you guys as a city want to bring in the right partners, right? Connectivity, hardware, software, cloud, but you also don't want to sift through thousands of RFPs to do that, right? So how do you narrow it down and get some traction there? I mean, that's the execution part, right? If you don't choose the correct partners, you are going to fail, right? And that's just, we've already been talking about all the failures, but I think we could get there a lot faster if we have folks that are experts in the field that can really get us there faster from an ecosystem perspective.
But to add to this point is, I think, obviously once you have like authoritarian government, they can implement things a lot faster. But within our political realities, we just need to work within the constraints. I think we can get quite a bit done. And I think it's very helpful when you think, really think long terms in terms of smart city solutions. You need to think in terms of election cycles. You need to think about the election campaigns. And what we're going to see actually we're starting to see it, and we're going to see even more in the upcoming elections and mayor elections and so on, mayors running on the very tech-heavy campaigns to also attract a lot of younger voters and get them to vote, and basically asking, what kind of city do you want to live in? Do you want to help create your community? Do you want to participate in your community? Do you want to change the community you're living in? I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And I'm personally very optimistic on how things are going to play out.
Okay, so let's talk about use cases. I think that there are a lot of, and I know we talked we've already had quite a few conversations about some of the primary use cases that we're seeing today. What are some of the more emerging or interesting use cases that maybe we're not thinking about today that are on your radar? Anything that you've come across that's been interesting, creative? Maybe leveraging existing infrastructure or leveraging one technology to do multiple things?
Okay, so again, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? When one of the big, conversations was always around, LED streetlights. That was like the thing, do this and everything else falls from that. And I mean, I've given a number of talks, and a lot of people get upset about it, but if you're gonna put a radio on a light, doesn't it always have to be on? A lot of these street lights are circuit switched. So that means if you have a radio there and that circuit goes off, you just lost your network. But if you get them to leave it on all the time, how much energy is that radio consuming? And who's metering that? So probably about 3-4 years ago, I started looking at traffic and traffic management and how to really do that. That to me, and I wanted to do it with no investment. So Palo Alto said, all right, we have a problem. Are you going to be able to do it? And they said, we work together with every auto manufacturer there except for Tesla, because Elon said he was going to do it himself, to help understand the baseline, what was happening through the city of Palo Alto in terms of traffic congestion and everything of that nature. We opened it up, said we were going to use data and let all of these app developers come and make things happen. I walked in and said, you're going to fail. And they said, why? I said, don't take my word for it, just try it. And then they did. They opened it up. They invited a number of big players. And they said, what's our fail criteria? I said, if they call and say they have to talk to a traffic engineer, they fail. Every single one of them said, I need to talk to a traffic engineer. There was one company that was able to actually do it. And they put their technology in using data from the traffic management system only, no investment. And they were able to deliver an application that told you when the traffic light was going to change, how many times people were pressing the crosswalk button, how many people were going, which direction they were going, and they did this throughout what Palo Alto owned, which exposed another problem. If you think you're going to go into a city and say, we're going to automate all your traffic signals, you got to find out how many of those the city owns. So I found out that 240 traffic signals were owned. Palo Alto only owned 120. I had to go and talk to everybody else to try to get access to them, and I'm still talking to them 3 years later. So their traffic management app, you might have seen it on the Audi commercial where they said that the vehicle can tell you when the light's going to change. It's the same technology. So that was done with zero capital investment.
Now, I think a lot of the use cases are around, that we're hearing, traffic management, congestion, and then public transportation. Are you guys seeing anything in terms of public transit, public transportation use cases, or you have any examples or anything that you?
I know this. Oh,
That's right.
In Chicago, I know one of the bus companies there was looking at it for paratransit because they were saying it was really inefficient because it's government funded, and every year the price was going up, but they weren't servicing more people. And so they were trying to figure out, what are the cost factors and how to manage that. So they had gotten a third-party company to use the phone data to do crowdsourcing to see the traffic pattern movement. And then it's still in process, but they're looking at how to optimize it. So for example, some of the rides with the paratransit was like double the cost of a typical Uber ride. So they're saying, well, why wouldn't we use Uber instead of using, the bus companies? So they're still continuing to look at it, but that's one area that they're looking to see how can we use IoT and data technology to kind of optimize that, given that it's federal funding, to better deliver services to the citizenship.
We're seeing an increase in hacking or growth, developer competitions, and cities opening up RFPs that are more creative or challenging, challenges so they could win small projects like that. Are you guys seeing anything interesting, or is that happening in cities that you're working with?
Daniel does that all the time. No, but just to take a step back, Daniel actually knows of excellent, I mean, it actually had Fred.
Right. Fred in San Diego?
Yes.
Let's hear about that.
You mean the
Free ride everywhere downtown.
Right, right. So that was actually done on zero investment in San Diego. Was done with through the parking fees and the city budget, providing free rides for everyone in the downtown. You use an app. You can call this little shuttle. It will pick you up along the routes and get you anywhere around downtown. It's free, and it's pretty cool.
So related to transport, there's a collection of local councils in the UK who have come together to form something called One Transport. Yep. And I think that's a really good example of working with different technology stakeholders, InterDigital, in this case with their Cordant platform, and coming together to create essentially a data exchange that is managed by this one transport agency and allows for data to be discovered, exposed, discovered, federated, and used by different third-party alternate stakeholders. So, benefits that they are citing that they're receiving from this are better traffic planning, reduced wait times and better fit of transit to actual rider needs, reduced environmental impacts from traffic. So this kind of data market is, I think, a really cutting edge use of technology to solve, again, problems around operational efficiency and betterment of the lives of citizens.
Okay, one last question before we open it up to the audience, and this is about privacy. As we in the U.S., and it's different overseas because of GDPR, but as we in the U.S. are collecting more and more information, even personal information around citizens, what do you foresee as some of the challenges or issues that cities are facing today or will tomorrow? And then secondly, will we get to a point from a regulatory standpoint at the city level where they put a stop to some of this data collection due to privacy concerns?
I'll let you guys start.
I would imagine with, since they're putting up a lot of cameras in the cities to collect information, the sensor is already there, but they're collecting information on people. So now with facial recognition, I think that they're going to be storing more of our personal information and where you are at what time, because then they could identify you, just like when you go on Facebook and they know it's you based on your image. So I think it's going to be a lot more challenges around that, but I think the laws are falling behind the technology. So by the time they get to a point where they realize it's a problem, it's kind of, the data is already there and information has already been collected. So I don't know how they'll go back and, fix that, but it's already being done, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And in some cases in China, this is actually, it's not a flaw, it's the design, right? They're actively trying to put video surveillance widespread throughout the society and tying that in with essentially a social media type rating system of the citizenry.
Yeah.
So for a lot of reasons that can be problematic. Fortunately, here it's more of a flaw rather than a design. We just need to figure out the right way to work around these issues, but I think it can be done.
I mean, I definitely agree technology is leading everything. But I think it also comes into fear, uncertainty, and doubt. While there's a group of individuals that are very tech savvy and understand how to make the technology and all of this artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all of that do what it is that we would like it to do, there's a group that is sitting there making the decisions that says no. I don't want that camera. You're tracking me. I don't want you to use my phone. You're counting me. I don't want you to do all of these things, which will indeed slow the adoption of smart city IoT technology across the board. But I think that there's a generational gap between that because I have kids and my kids accept everything. I'm like, did you check that? No, I just want the app. Just give it here.
Yeah, I remember a year ago or a couple of years ago, the Super Bowl when it was hosted in Houston, talking to the Verizon team, and they were talking about how they were using the camera systems at the Super Bowl to scan the arena, and they were usually using facial recognition and tying that back to the NCIC database, the criminal database, and they were identifying folks that were in that database as they're sitting there in the audience. And so that's just one example of something that's happening in the background from, they had federal department there, of course, FBI was involved, the local Houston Police Department, they were all involved in looking at all that, and they had such a close eye because of the terroristic threats and really keeping an eye on everything. But that's something that we as citizens go into a game, we wouldn't think. And I think there are a lot of things that are happening in the cities today that are a lot of data that's being collected by the city today that we as citizens, we as patrons or visitors, we don't even know. And so
I have a question to ask you. How many of you have looked into video data policy, city video data policy and video privacy? Just one? Two? I would love to talk to you tonight and share my perspective.
So we have about 8 minutes. So we want to open it up for, here, I'll give you your mic back. Q&A, fire away, rapid fire session here. The lights are bright.
Yeah, it's very.
For traffic congestion, do you see Hyperloop being adopted in different cities? Chicago's just putting something in for the airport.
I hear a lot of talk about it. I mean, because of inductive loops having been used throughout a number of cities, the only challenge there is maintenance. The inductive loops work beautifully. So I think it's going to be up to Chicago to prove it, and then I think you'll see a larger following once that happens.
And I believe at Mobile World Congress, and I wish that I could remember her name, who gave the keynote for the Department of Transportation for LA, mentioned Hyperloop. It sounded to me like there was a lot of super innovative things that they were thinking due to the Olympics coming. Mm-hmm. To prepare for that. So maybe I think things are happening more internationally, but I don't hear it as much in the States.
I know one transport was doing it, like you said, in the UK, they were doing it for Silverstone and special events to manage the traffic in and out of the venue, but not on a large scale.
I think LA has to do something, otherwise it's just...
They can only go up, is what I'm hearing. And some of the cities that are so congested, and they don't have any real estate left, so they have to go up. And I think that's what we're going to see in some of the more condensed cities, is transportation that is being moved up.
It's going to be more like Minority Report.
We might get there.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Hector Dominguez from the city of Portland. Portland, Oregon, by the way. It's more like a comment. In Portland, we are actually very concerned about how technology has been applied in general. So we just passed our priorities framework early this year, where as many other cities, we put equity as the main use case for our technology. And that's based on the premise that cities actually different to consumer applications. We care more about social capital rather than economic capital. And that's actually sometimes difficult to translate, but within the city, we obviously have our own concerns, homelessness, all the opioid crisis, displacement, and so on. So we really, based on that and thinking about that the residents in Portland are very skeptical of technology. So we are trying to develop some strategies around generating trust with our residents, and we recognize that that's going to take some time. Privacy comes in at the center of that. We are inspired by what's going on with GDPR, of course, and we are actually having a very active work. We are going to try to develop some privacy rights for our residents and putting that into the residents' perspective rather than the city's perspective, as many other cities do. And then the right policy from that. Let's see how everything goes, that experiment. That comes also with the challenge that we need to train our residents and make them be aware of how data is being used. Informed consent is going to be a big challenge as well. So this is more like a comment of what we are doing, and a message to all these different companies that would like to talk with us in Portland. So if you bring any solution thinking about social capital, well, let's start talking about that.
No, it's interesting to hear about the human side of smart cities, right? This is such a technology-centric event, but thinking about the social impact, health and wellness, privacy concerns, opt-in, and how do we manage policies and some of the things that may come back to haunt us later from the citizen perspective. It's good to get your perspective and how you guys are dealing with that. I do think that we have a gap in the market, and we do have to better educate our citizens around the data. They want to know that you're collecting XYZ on them, but they also need to learn and know how we're not using this information in a personal manner. We're using this information in a more aggregate manner, and it takes some education and communication back to the citizens for them to understand the value of that. They don't understand the value of that. They just think that you're tapping into their daily lives, and it's invasive, right? That's good feedback. Any other questions?
Over here.
Can't see behind the podium.
Hi, this is Preetham from Subex. So, question to Bill. Recently, California passed this bill on IoT security, and all the technology companies have to abide by some of the regulations. So, how do you think this is affecting the industries, the citizens, and the cities themselves in deploying some of the smart city technologies?
I think it's impacting the industry or the solution developers far more than it's impacting anyone else. And oftentimes, whenever you start looking at, we're going to deploy XYZ solution, security is an afterthought. Especially when you talk about battery-operated devices. They have very little space to hold any certificates or anything like that. And 9 times out of 10, when a company comes in and talks to a city about a solution, they're going to say, oh, we've encrypted the data. That's encryption. That's not security. Talk to me about your certificate authority. Talk to me about your, whether you use an IPv4 versus IPv6. I think it's impacted the solution providers far more than anyone else. But the citizen side of it, I think they feel good. They feel good. They know that these devices are not just talking randomly and just collecting data randomly, and that there's an element of, the government actually cares about our privacy, as opposed to them deploying, neat technology that we don't know that we're going to get any benefit out of.
And that was at the state level, right? California being the first state to, push out the IoT security mandate, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And expect other cities to follow. Any other questions? In the back here.
I guess the question is really around pace of change and adoption. So given all the barriers, funding and so forth, maybe the lack of internal resources that a city may have, not having the political maybe advantage to your Singapore example, everyone here has shared interest. So with that as the backdrop, I guess, do you have a forecast of what you think the acceleration, the actual adoption that can happen in the years to come? At what pace? And if so, is there any areas specifically where you see where it's more likely to take place than others?
I would have to say if we didn't have those barriers and funding was not, we had an open wallet, we would have sensors on everything in that city. And the only barriers I think would come afterwards, which are some of the discussions we just had, which is what happens when we're not implementing the right security, and then what happens when the citizens may push back on privacy. But I think it's endless. We look at the market a little bit differently, and I have some market forecasts that I have internally on city, and I actually published some stuff in the spring around the impact of smart infrastructure and the impact to the global economy around that as well. But I think Sam may also have some forecasts and some models around that. But I think most of the things that we do internally from a research perspective, is really forecasting and modeling things out based on given the reality that we're living in now, right? We're probably not ones to look at, okay, take away all the barriers, what do we look at? And we're talking billions of connected things, right? Trillions.
Yeah, so IHS has a small smart cities research team. So my work is more kind of broadly IoT, but this team has a tracker. Currently, they are tracking about 1,174 projects worldwide. That breaks out a little over 300 each in Americas, APAC, and Europe. Not obviously completely level across, but in the 300 plus range. And then Middle East and Africa, 95 projects. And those were 2017 figures, and that's across physical infrastructure, mobility and transport, energy and environmental sensing, security, and a few others. We don't forecast projects per se, but we do have a forecast of devices, IoT devices that are, we estimate, in use now for smart cities in a smart cities context and out into the future. I think those figures, it's about 370-ish million globally, 2017. I think it's about 860-ish million, 2022. It works out to about a 35% CAGR. So that's the forecast that.
And I think from a hype cycle perspective, we're still going, we're rising, right? I don't mean, when do you think we're going to peak? You think that we're 5 years away, 10 years away?
Smart city is a
smart cities.
Hype topic. Sometimes I feel like we're almost peaked in terms of the hype, and it's time to actually get things done. And I think we're about to have a Sputnik moment with the smart cities, because as we travel and go to other cities worldwide and see how much smarter they are compared to our own cities here. And like I was just in August, I was in the city of Moscow. I was blown away. I just couldn't believe it. There are no parking meters. Everybody's paying for parking with their smartphones. There's a whole bunch of stuff like this. And we're like the company that, or the country that produced companies like Google and Facebook and Uber and so on. As it comes to the cities, we're still very much behind, but it doesn't have to be that way. And when I think about California DMV, which shouldn't exist in the form it exists, it should be all electronic, right? And we have all the technology, we have all the tools to make it happen. So going back to the early point of, okay, I think we're going to have the Sputnik moment after which things are going to start happening very, very fast, because we have everything it takes.
I would say too that from a technology readiness perspective, we are there.
Yeah.
There are plenty. I mean, we are there from an application software cloud. There are so many tools right now to run right now. I think it's all the other barriers that we've been talking about today is the reason why we're behind. The U.S. is behind globally.
I was wondering too, because I think a lot of the cities are focused on putting sensors out there, but I'm thinking with all the smartphone and the technologies on the smartphone, that a lot of that data can be leveraged, it can be anonymized. So for example, a lot of the location data is already being used, it's already being sold, it's anonymized and sold in the industry or companies who sold businesses on that. So I'm thinking now you have accelerometers, you have gyroscopes, you have all these different things that are on the smartphone, so that information can be captured and can be analyzed through machine learning or AI to get a lot of the information, so you don't need to put sensors everywhere. So for example, if you have a group of cars or vehicles going over a bridge, you can get the vibration data from the smartphones versus having to deploy sensors. So I think we should probably start looking at it from that perspective instead of saying we have to put sensors everywhere and then the connecting technology. The data is probably already there.
I heard there was actually a project, I think in Sacramento, to do that, a partnership between Sacramento and Waze to get that data combined.
I think in the spring too, that there was someone here from Sacramento that was talking about they had a major initiative to end homelessness. And so there is a lot of funding dollars around that, so, which is driving tech companies to leverage and look at how do we leverage and use technology to help solve some of those problems. So there may be some initiatives in siloed pockets that are driven around a city goal or initiative or the vision funds, those kinds of things, where there might be some funding and resources that will help drive some of the projects that you might be able to cross-collaborate and get
back
work
to
together.
the inside of the city again.
We have time for one more question.
more.
Keith?
I think you guys have touched on it a little bit about the political aspect of it. I don't think that conversation is brought up enough in terms of smart cities. I mean, because obviously we look at these models that are in Asia, Europe, and everywhere else, but it doesn't fit a US-based model, for example. And I think the other part, which you guys are touching on, is all these different silos. So one of the part of the silo is you may have the IT department, which doesn't understand the business. Then you have the business, which doesn't understand the IT department. Then you have everyone else that doesn't understand the community or the different council districts. Like, Bill, you're talking about Palo Alto at 65,000 people. Imagine a large city that a council district starts matching 65,000 people. Then you get all these competing forces. And I think the main issue is how do you make the project become top priority versus some of the other issues that cities face. Say you may have crumbling infrastructure, which goes to the top, which may lead to potential funding sources. If you have like a bond or something, that's where you might slip in some of the smart city stuff in that area. So it's just kind of aligning those different ecosystems across the whole overall city and stuff. Because I think everyone's kind of in their own little silo and stuff. And that's why we're seeing these projects not move forward and stuff. So I think that's the key factor. And I think really understanding those political cycles are very important. So say, for example, you get a mayor first year, 2 year, next year, 3 year, year 3, you're in that, election cycle. So everything comes to a halt. And I guarantee you at city council, everything just pauses and stuff. So I think having that political aspect of it is probably the most important thing missing. And also, that doesn't include the procurement process as well, too. When you start talking about spending something over a certain threshold, how do you get that approved as well, too? So I think that's the other issue as well, too. So
That's good feedback. Keith, City of Atlanta, so much larger, I guess, population-wise.
about 500,000, but in the day we swell up to 1 million, and the metro area is very huge. So.
Or when the airports are full. All right, so we're going to give a round of applause for our advisory board.